welcome back to Building a Fighter. My name is Dr. Austin Shane, sports chiropractor in Scottsdale, Arizona. With me, as always, badass strength coach in Denver, Colorado, Alex Friedman. Today, we want to talk about how your technical game planning is going to affect how you strategize for your strength and conditioning. So, Alex, your topic, you do it. What are we
Yeah.
talking?
So the biggest factor in this that I'm looking at is you're going to have a technical, tactical game plan going into a fight, right? This guy I'm fighting is crazy power in his hands. I have to wrestle him. Or
Mhm.
we're pretty even kickboxing, but I want to out volume this guy or I want to outstrike him via my volume, right? So it's like, what physical demands are we planning for on the individual side of things?
Mhm.
Because the sport demands are what the sport demands are. We can plan for those and quantify those based on your weight class, based on we're doing MMA, boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, whatever the rule set is. And then your individual needs are where we really have to kick up the modifications in this one, right? Because for the lack of a better term, in camp, you're going to plan for certain qualities you know you're going to see in the fight.
Yep.
But then once we check those boxes, we need to tailor this to the individual in front of us, right? With what they need. And maybe what they need isn't necessarily what they've historically lacked or their historical problems are, but what's ahead of them in the next fight. So if we got a guy that's traditionally a kickboxer and then he wants to go wrestle for 3 rounds, that's a hugely different
Yes.
individual demand going into a fight.
Well, I think so. A caveat right away is you can't just change. So, say you have a power athlete, say you have Francis Ngannou. I can't turn him into a wrestler. I'm just not going to, right? I'm not going to change his entire, we'll say, exercise physiology for one fight. I can't do it. I'm not going to change him from a explosive power athlete to a lactate driven athlete, right? What we can do is we can try to maximize those floors as best as possible and focus on those skills if we know that's going to be a game plan. So something I see all the time is like, oh yeah, we're fighting a wrestler, so we want to wrestle. We want to get better at wrestling, right? Or we want to focus on, we know we're going to wrestle, so we have to do a wrestling based game plan for everything. So we're fighting a daggy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't make you as good of an energy system efficiency standpoint as somebody that's been wrestling since they were 5 years old. That's just not going to happen. But what we can do is we can expose you to the stimuli over and over and over again, while also trying to have one or 2 days focused on what you're really fucking good at and what your game plan is, not just being on the defensive, but also being on the offensive, and trying to highlight your strengths and give you that exposure to the lactate, give you that exposure to the prolonged isometric holds, or the like 30-30s on the bike, or something like getting that feeling, a prolonged BFR exposure, like getting that feeling of heaviness in your arms like you've been wrestling for a long period of time. So we can get better at it, but we're not going to change your entire profile in one camp. So it's something to note.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of how I view this is we need to be confident and be prepared for anywhere the fight goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we're going to plan for it to go a certain place. So we got to build capacities, we have to build powers to understand those positions, understand those flurries, those moments that happen within the round. There's going to be a hard wrestling flurry for 30 seconds.
Yep.
I need you as an athlete to be confident in your preparation to say, after I get up from this flurry, I can still go. Right. So it's like, as much as we're altering our physical training effects for this game plan, we're also instilling confidence that I'm prepared for anywhere and everywhere, and I'm going to lead the dance, not let my opponent lead the dance.
Right. Well, that's extremely important to talk about too. Is like we've talked numerous times about the number one thing that we can do from a training standpoint leading up to a fight is make the athlete confident going into the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The more confident athlete typically is going to win, as long as it's not just false confidence, as long as we're not just
Right.
gaslighting somebody.
Right.
But for the most part, that confidence in your training is what you got to tailor it around. And I've been moving my training in a way of what we've talked to Augie and Eric about in the past about superpowers. Like something that is a mainstay in my programming nowadays is I always ask the athlete in their initial consult, like, if you had to pick two lifts that make you feel like Superman, what are they? And no matter what, whether we're fighting a wrestler, fighting a striker, fighting who the fuck ever, I'm going to have those lifts in their program in some way, shape, or form, and progressing them through, getting them
Yep.
better and better and better at it. Because if they feel like they're getting better at their superpowers, guess what? They're going to feel like fucking Superman stepping into that cage.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think you have to feed that inherent advantage that you bring into the cage, and that's what I almost mean when I say lead the dance. Right? If you can set the pace of the fight and you can dictate more positions, like this fight is going to happen where I want it and how fast I want it, and I'm leading the dance, then I think you have a way better chance at winning the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's just that and what factors go into leading the dance, right? It's your confidence, it's your preparedness, and then it's um, how you influence the position.
Mm-hmm.
So straight away, we need all of these tools that will get us there. And strength and conditioning can be a huge weapon, especially at that instilling the confidence and then holding nothing back because you're confident that I can go 15 minutes, I can go 25
Right.
minutes at this pace or in these positions, or um, again, I can lead the dance for the whole fight, which is so pivotal to winning the fight.
Right. It's a change in mindset. I feel like so
Yeah,
often when we get too far into game planning that we're so focused on what the other person is doing. We're so focused
yeah,
on, oh, that person's Dagestanis. Oh, they're so good at wrestling. They're going to try to get on top and hold you down, and they don't really care if they're going to do any damage, so to say. They just want to get on top and control. Or you're fighting a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist. Oh, we can't get to the ground. Even if you're a wrestler, we got to keep it on the feet. We got to stay on the feet. We're so afraid of their submissions. Like Vanessa. People are so afraid to go to the fucking ground with Vanessa, they'll stay on the feet and then she cleans them up.
hmm,
Like, it's one of those things that stop focusing on the other person. You have to understand what that person is doing in front of you and what they're good at. Yes,
yeah,
1000%. But if you change how you fight around what that person's doing, they've already won.
yeah,
They won the mindset battle. They won the confidence battle. They walking into that cage, if one person's going to stick to their guns and what they do really well, and one person is modifying their entire fighting style
hmm,
around the other person, it sounds dumb to even say out loud that that's some people's game plans, but it is. Like,
yeah.
that's
I
so
agree.
ass backwards and it's so counterproductive because you have to trust what got you to the dance.
Yep.
You don't need to switch up what got you to the dance. You just need to be mindful and cognizant of what that person across from you is good at.
Absolutely, and that's like something I saw definitely in Makhachev's last fight in
Mm-hmm.
Khabib. Is influences like there's a path to victory. Take the path. Like
Mm-hmm.
why would we derive from that? And I saw that. I actually saw this played out extremely well in the last camp that we at Land Out Performance Factory X did with Jonathan Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
He did a fantastic job in this last camp, leaning into uncomfortable positions and practicing, knowing and with the wholehearted game plan that I'm still going to stick to my guns,
Right.
right? I need exposure in some of these clinch and wrestling positions that I'm not so good at, but I'm also under the understanding that when I'm in there for a fight, I'm going to utilize my speed and my leg kicks and my explosivity to put damage on this to his opponent,
Right.
right? So
So, pause. How did you highlight that from the strength and conditioning side?
So for him, which he comes in really obviously in shape, but he comes to Denver from Texas.
Yeah.
So he's got about a 3 or 4 week acclimation window or process. But then once he's in camp, we put him into our SPP group, right? And so what we did for him was we put a little bit more on the lactic capacity side of things instead of on the lactic power side. His
Gotcha.
superpower, his inherent speed and explosivity are going to be there, right? That's what we talked about. That's what
Yeah.
he's made his 20 fight career on or whatever, right? So we lean into that in certain aspects and we let him utilize that. But then we know he's doing extra work on the ground. He's doing extra work in the clinch. So how can we give him the capacity to hang in for that throughout the whole training week? Or how can we give him the capacity that when we get to the fight to be comfortable in that? And again, if you watched his last fight, he got gritty in the third and he stuck it out the
Hmm.
whole time. So that was an extremely inspiring performance, I
That
thought.
was that Pedro Munoz?
Uh, Saeed Nurmagomedov.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which again, there was two fantastic kickboxers going at it, and then Jonathan, I think, was just more willing to get nasty with it because that's what he had prepared for, and he
Got
willingly
you.
put himself in those uncomfortable positions. In the fact, he willingly put himself in those uncomfortable positions, saying, "If it goes here, I'm good," and it
Right.
happened to go there a lot, right?
Hmm.
So, but yeah, on a technical strength and conditioning side of things, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. What did we do? We leaned into the lactic capacity a little bit, and we backed off a little bit on the superpower, which we knew he was going to have going in. So it's almost
Right.
a little bit of the opposite of what you were saying, Austin.
Hmm. Which is okay.
Yeah,
There's
right.
a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but for the most part, it made him more comfortable, right? It made him feel like he could explode and be able to tolerate that lactic or that lactate into the deep waters, right?
Yep.
And that's what matters. That's what allowed him to feel like Superman walking into the fight.
Right.
I've just seen that in my experience, if I focus on what they're really good at least once a week, then they're going to be confident as fuck going into that fight.
Yeah.
Like if somebody, for whatever reason, if somebody just loves bench press, you can change a bench press in so many different ways and so many different stimuli that can match basically whatever type of energy system you're trying to chain.
Yeah.
Like, say we're doing, say we want to do some sort of like explosive base movement. Boom, we can do power bench, or we can do like dumbbell floor press with a pop emphasis, or we can put a barbell on a VBT and we can track the overall velocity of the bar. Right? Say we want to do it for some sort of like tempo. We can do 10-20s on a dumbbell bench press and just rep that out for 4 minutes. You know how much that fucking sucks?
Yep.
Is 10-20s with bench press. We can do static dynamics, which is just 2 reps every 10 seconds and just rep that out over and over and over again to build lactate capacity. Like there's all of these different things that we can focus around that we can pick an exercise. The exercise doesn't really matter. It only matters to that athlete. What matters to the coach is how do we implement that exercise and how do we make it match our game plan, not just the strength and conditioning game plan, but also the skill game plan as well.
Yeah, and then do you see results from it? I think is ultimately what the coach is looking at, right?
Right.
Is my athlete gassing out as sparring, or are we having good plays? And it's so insane, and we talk about this all the time. But and even Coach Mark Montoya says this: the fight game is 80% mental.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it crazy how big of a factor the psychology of strength and conditioning is going in? Like, if you have your athlete either as sparring or strength and conditioning, like, man, I felt off today. I felt winded. Like, why aren't I in shape? Right? You can say till you're blue in the face, and I've done this, been in this position, like, you're in shape. You
Yep.
are in shape. This is designed to make you tired,
Yep.
right? Like, but that belief by the athlete almost holds more weight than the physical output that we're training essentially.
Right.
Right?
No. Oh,
And so,
yeah.
yeah, so I definitely think that's why that's bona fide to go into an athlete's superpower and hit that at least once a week. I think that's a hugely important insight um, into confidence going into the fight. Um, but I also think it's worth factoring your athletes again strategic game plan and trying to build up those weaknesses with the understanding that it's maybe not as important.
Well, so how do you guys go about figuring out the strategic game plan? Do you guys sit down with Mark, or do you ask the athlete? Like, how do you guys go about that?
Sit down a little less so. It's through a lot of like informal communication channels, talking with the athlete. Talking with Mark comes to strength and conditioning with the athletes, so that
Gotcha.
helps a ton when we're
That's dope.
talking. And then yeah, and then me being a sparring helps a lot. And I talk to um, some of our other coaches that do a lot of the back end film and game planning work to get that insight, and then I can make again. I've started to make a lot more individualized programs based on a lot of
Yep.
that feedback. So that helps a ton, rather than just the blank model of okay, we're late camp, we're gonna do lactic power. We're late camp, we
Right.
need to train explosivity, right? Like it's like okay, we're late camp and we're going in to grapple somebody for 15 minutes. Let's keep hammering that.
Right, like Alex Pajea's game plan is going to be so much different than Kamaru Usman's. But if they're late camp, some places they just do the same fucking workout. That doesn't make any sort of sense, at
Right.
least to me. But for the most part, that's where individualization really comes into play, and having that open line of communication with the coaching staff.
Mm-hmm.
Like I, on my end, I haven't been over to Fight Ready as much as I used to, just because I'm busier in office. But I'll still have a conversation with the athlete. I'm lucky enough that I was there so frequently for so long that I kind of understand, and I still have my skill coaches cap on too. So I can understand the game plan. I'll watch film as well from the strength coach side of things, as well as the wrestling coach side of things, and see what I need and see what I think that matchup's going to look like. If I feel like I need to call Santino and be like, hey, is this what the game plan is? And have that checkup, boom, that's what we'll do. But for the most part, I feel like this is where MMA or strength coaches that work with MMA and combat sports in general need to have some sort of understanding of the combat sport and understanding of how to watch film, understanding of how to understand the sport. Like it's not enough to just understand the demands of MMA. There's so many different aspects of MMA. You need to understand not just the demands of the sport, but you need to understand the demands of a matchup. You need to understand the demands of if I'm going to fight Izzy, I got to be fucking like I might do some neuro training. Like I would throw out there, I'd have him do like if I was training a fighter to fight Izzy that's so heavy on his feints and he's going to try to draw you out and a lot of it is reactive in nature, I'm going to do reactive training with that athlete. I haven't used my reactive trainers since fucking Nam. But I in that case where I'm fighting my athlete is fighting an athlete that is extremely heavy on reactive based movements like a Conor McGregor, but mostly like Izzy. Izzy's the perfect example of somebody that draws you out with feints. Then I'm going to throw reactive training in a lot more than if I'm fighting a Kamaru Usman, for example, who is so heavy in his wrestling that he's just going to try to come in there. He doesn't really care about feints. He'll do them, of course, but he cares more about dominating and just blowing through you.
Right. Yeah, and I think to your point about knowing um, the sport, knowing the matchup, knowing what a matchup will play out like, you have to know the training demands that go along with each
Yep.
quality as well, right? Because like if I'm a strength coach and a skill coach tells me we're going to do a wrestle heavy camp, like that should be like
Yep.
red silent sirens blaring off in your head. Like this athlete is 100% going to come in overtrained.
Yeah, this shit's gonna suck.
This athlete's going to get ground into dust as skill practice.
Yeah.
So I have to plan accordingly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And on your end, Austin, how much do you plan or prepare for that? If like an athlete says like, I want to strike a lot for this camp, or you get your typical wrestler that now thinks he's a boxer, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna strike a million times. I need to get better at my striking, especially for this next fight. I want to knock out. How do you alter your strength and conditioning plan in that case?
I mean, it really comes down to the athlete's willingness to accept the feedback I want to give them at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? Because I'm not going to if the athlete comes to me and they're headstrong and they're like, I'm gonna get better at striking. And I know that they're gonna walk into that cage and they're gonna try to knock somebody's fucking block off with an overhand right, then I need to prepare them for that. At the end of the day, while they do have a head coach, that person, that athlete right in front of me, that's who I have to help the most I possibly can. I need to make them as confident as possible. So if he thinks he's going to walk into that fight and throw an overhand right and knock this motherfucker out, I need to do everything in my power as a strength coach to give him the strongest overhand right possible,
Yeah.
right? Um, but if I had my way, if I have an athlete that listens,
Yeah.
um,
Right.
then I'm going to look at the matchup, individualize the matchup, or individualize the training based around what the athlete's strengths are. At least one day, like I talked about, and then I'm going to look at the matchup, potentially sit down with the coaches, and figure out what this fight's going to look like. Because even though anything can happen in that cage, if you've seen MMA long enough and you understand your athletes, you really truly get how they fight and you've watched them over and over and over again, you know what their tendencies are. You know what they're going to walk in there and do. You know what they're going to be looking for. And as long as they're not in their own head about a matchup, then they're going to go in there and try to execute their game plan. So I'm going to, with all of my power, shift their training towards what I can make them as high of a ceiling as possible
Yeah.
and really focus on, say I'm focusing on a wrestler that's trying to throw an overhand right. I'm going to give them the lactate work. I'm going to give them what I know, what they're going to rely on when they get tired, which is their wrestling, because they need to be able to feel comfortable in deep waters. But I am going to also focus at least one day of my training on alactic power bursts. I'm going to focus on trying to give them as much pop from their fucking hips and their shoulders as possible and allow them to do that at least 8 to 15 times in a fight. That's my numbers. If you're looking for a knockout punch, they need to be able to, in 15 minutes, throw it 8 to 15 times in order for that to land. Because not every punch can be 100%, which is another thing we could talk about. Is I think one of the best ways to help athletes is teaching them how to pace, teaching them, especially in this game plan setting, where they need to understand what they can do for prolonged periods of time. Because I feel like so many athletes that are like LFA level, they don't get that they need to be they can't just throw everything at 100%. No person on this earth can throw every single strike or every single grappling exchange at 100% in the last 15 minutes. It's just not going to happen. So teaching them what their pace should be, what their exertion should feel like in a setting or in a density circuit, if you will, is a fantastic way to teach them this stimulus.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's really common. I don't know if epidemic is the right term, but athletes that like, I just shouldn't get tired.
Yeah.
I should
Oh,
be
all the
able to
time. Yeah.
go 100% and I just shouldn't get tired.
Colby
It's
can
like,
do it.
it's like, no, like there's levels, right? And like the athletes like Colby, he doesn't get tired for a reason.
Bro, he throws it 60% every
It's
single
like
strike.
he's not slinging things to knock you out. There's a reason he doesn't knock guys out, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I think there's a big understanding in pace. And I think that's a really big nuance that you said. Now, I think one other thing we can really rely on from training is we can, and I think this is overlooked in a lot of contexts, is you can plan on the physical adaptations that your athletes are getting from their skill and tactical training,
Mhm.
right? If I again go back to that skill coach that says we're going to have a wrestle heavy camp.
Right.
Okay, this athlete's going to be bathing in lactate, and they're going to have some lactic capacity out the ass,
Yes.
and they're going to be super fatigued, but that's beyond the point. So, as a strength and conditioning coach, I maybe don't have to hit that traditional lactic capacity,
We don't need to do 30-30s
eight
every
to
single
four
day
weeks
I
out,
see them.
right? When they're already either doing Shark Tank or 5 minute rolls or whatever positional sparring
Right.
um, for their grappling, right? So when I see them, I make the interpretation of how they're looking walking in and what their camp is bringing, make the adjustment to the plan, but I probably can plan a little more um, alactic bursts, power sets, things with a lot of rest in between because
Mhm.
they're not getting that at practice. And again, you have to know the context for this, right? Like
Right.
you have to know what their coach is going to put them through, and that's why it's really important to have good relationships with head
Yeah,
coaches.
it's crazy. We could talk all the technical terms we want, but at the end of the day, guess what? It comes down to having a good relationship or at least an understanding with each other between the
Yeah,
strength side and the skill side. Because if you don't have that, and if you don't understand what's going on with this game plan, then you can't help your athlete to the fullest extent.
I guess so
So
too.
please talk to coaches.
That's the if you're taking notes, that's the note to underline. Have a
Yes,
good
yeah. The
relationship.
TLDR, too long didn't read.
Yeah.
Have open communication across all fronts.
Yes. 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 And understand what that means by either going to practice, watching practice, and again, I know it's a big time investment. I know it's this and that. It's like,
Bro, it's not even a fucking big time investment. It's an hour and a half out of your goddamn week to go to sparring. And this is coming from somebody at, I'm a hypocrite. I haven't gone in a month, but that's
right.
just because I've been out of town a little bit. But for the most part, I try to make it at least once a month to fight ready sparring, if not once every other week, to try to get in there, show face, but then also understand who's in camp, understand where the coaches are at, watch their sparring rounds. You learn so fucking much from watching your athletes spar because you get to pick up, like, I've had athletes that they're the worst sparrers on earth. I've been so nervous for them to go into that fucking cage. Yet they go in there and they turn into a different person once the lights are on, right? I've had athletes that are the exact opposite, where they are a world beater in sparring, never get tired, never do anything wrong. The best sparrer in the room walk into the fight, have an adrenaline dump in the first round every fucking time, right? So being able to understand what type of training or I guess trainer your athlete is, what type of athlete are they? Are they somebody that shows up for the bright lights? Then you don't have to worry about sparring as much, right? You still need to, but you don't have to worry about sparring as much. Is it somebody that is always really good in the room and then doesn't do well in the fight? Well, then I probably need to teach them how to relax a little bit. I could bring in a sports psych if we so choose, but then we could also look at, is this athlete overtraining and they look really good 2 weeks before the fight because they actually did peak 2 weeks before the fight and they just kept training way too hard and now they're on the decline, right? All of these different things you learn from going to sparring and showing up at the skill practice. And I'll say the same thing to the skill side. Skill coaches, follow Mark's examples, follow Coach Montoya's example. Go to fucking strength and conditioning and actually learn about it. You're never going to be the expert in this because there's people that spend years of their fucking lives learning about this, learning the minutia. What you can do is you can develop a general understanding and then further those lines of communication even more, right? And that's what's most important. It's not about you becoming an expert in somebody else's field. It's about you having an understanding of what that person does and working together in the best way possible for that athlete in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's way more important to know the other coach's tendencies and demeanor for a practice and a session than
Mm-hmm.
it is to know what exact drill they did.
Right.
Right.
Like a good example is like, so I'm obviously very close with the Fight Ready coaches, and Angel Cejudo's a friend of mine and somebody I'm relatively close with. If an athlete comes in and tells me that they had a really good wrestling practice and it was an Angel day, I know that I'm immediately switching my training from any sort of lactate work into something that's going to involve more rest, right? So if I'm on the same day as a heavy ass wrestling practice and Angel is the one doing it, who I know that means a lot of live wrestling, then I don't need to further give them the stimulus of say a 40-25. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
So I can focus, I can potentially just switch a day, right? I would just flip, maybe the Saturday is supposed to be an alactic day. We'd throw the alactic day on top and then allow them to do that harder bathe and lactate work on a different day that they didn't already receive that stimulus.
Yep. Amen, dude. Amen. Yeah, it's hugely important to know your whole context, know your relationship with the head coach, know what's going on in your athlete's whole training paradigm, which we always circle back to these same topics, right? It's like have good relationships and communication across all fronts. Know your athlete's training paradigm, their whole training schedule, and what intensity they should be working at, and
Mm-hmm.
then you can plan better and you can be better at your job.
Yep.
It's literally just a key cheat code to know what's going on, not write your pen or write your plan in pen, write it in pencil because shit has
It's
to change.
almost like the basics are what wins shit. How many cliches can we say in one 5 minute session? Because we've said a lot.
We've been cliche heavy the last
Because cliches
3 or
fucking work. There's a reason why people say them a lot.
yeah.
That's always been a big pet peeve of mine is people that shit on other people for saying cliches. That's because they work. It's because they make sense. It's because they actually fucking change shit or allow you to do something that's going to benefit another person. Cliches are good. Stick with cliches.
Austin is passionate about cliches.
Soapbox jumped off.
No, but that's really our podcast today about mashing up your strength and conditioning work with your skill and tactical training. Understand the relationships, understand what practices your athletes are going through, and then you can make a better periodized plan for in camp, right? Like know
Yes,
what's
sir.
happening, know the game plan, and then um, make your plan better. Essentially, it's not as important what game plan they have going in, but it's what training are they doing to facilitate that game plan, and then we complement.
Yes, sir. Well, if you guys got to get in touch with us, all of our information is going to be in the show notes. It's going to be emails and Instagrams. We have programs available at buildingafighter.com. That's going to be custom programs, membership options that are recurring every 3 weeks. You get new exercises coming through. That's going to be mobility, strength, conditioning, or our flagship Building a Fighter program, which is a combination of all three. And we also have preset programs available for the different variety of combat sports. Those are going to be at buildingafighter.com. This is Dr. Austin Shane,
Alex Friedman.
and we are out.